Hi, and welcome to a special Ask the Mayor edition of Newsmakers TV, Santa Barbara's most provocative local news program, on the air since 2014. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is October 13th, 2023, and who better to speak with on Friday the 13th than the world's luckiest man with the world's greatest job, Santa Barbara Mayor Randy Rowse. Mayor, thanks as always for making time for us. And joining in the conversation, my colleague, political reporter, journalism educator, podcaster, and international man of mystery, Josh Molina. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Good. So, Mayor, of course, the big question, I think, on everyone's mind that we want to start off with, are you going to endorse Roy Lee for supervisor?
He's my man. I only wish I met the guy. I don't know yet.
Well, he's
I'll have to go down and have dinner.
He's in the restaurant business, so you
Yes,
two
he is.
should have a lot to talk about.
And as I've said before, it's a special kind of genius to be in the restaurant business and seek an elected office. That's a special breed, right?
Well, that's
there.
why I'm thinking he's your guy, but we'll see. Maybe we'll talk about that a little down the road. All right. Hey, I want to start with this story Josh wrote. It's actually a couple of weeks ago now, but I just don't think it's gotten enough attention. Hotels versus housing, a developing flashpoint gripping Santa Barbara. And in Josh's reporting, we learned there is a total of 405 apartment units, counting ADUs, in the pipeline, compared with 635 hotel rooms. And people have taken sharp views on this, and it seems like every time somebody who's a hotel developer comes to the planning commission, they get their face ripped off. But let me read you two quotes from Josh's piece, Mayor, and tell me, which side of the spectrum you're on here. One is, we simply don't need more hotels and resorts, and definitely not bougie ones, said Stanley Zonkoff, a housing activist and donor relations manager for Cause. And then Mr. St. George, developer Ed St. George, says, if anybody would take the time to really study the history of Santa Barbara, they would realize this town has always been a tourist destination. In a town the size of Santa Barbara, restaurants need tourists to survive. The amount of properties you could build a successful hotel on in this town is extremely limited, whereas 98% of the properties in the town you could build successful housing. So when you see that in Josh's story, that we've got a third more hotel rooms in the pipeline than apartments. I mean, what's your takeaway from that? Do you agree with Cause, or do you agree with St. George?
Well, there's a little bit of truth in both of them, although I really eschew the word bougie. Is that the
Bougie?
word?
Yeah, we're gonna get to that.
Yeah,
Josh is gonna define that.
That's a little class defining to me. But in any case, as I look at the pipeline, whatever the pipeline means to anybody else, I was just doing some calculations this morning. There's about 2,600 units in the application sphere between all the projects we're doing, including the ones like the Housing Authority one on Carrillo, the one we just opened up on near what's the name of the park down there? The Verde Village. Can't think of the name of the park.
Help them out here, Josh. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, down Coda Street, right down there, right next to the park, where the park used to be, where the trapeze. Yes, Syracuse. Thank you. Any case, but we've got the thing going up at Tri-County Produce at some point in time. You've got the thing, Carrillo's got 3 housing projects that are coming up pretty quick. So I'm not really sure about the stats. I think those were in Ryan's article, if I'm not mistaken.
So they were in Josh's article.
And I don't know what the defining line of pipeline would be in this case. Now, it's true that there are a fair amount of hotels, the Wright project, dating back to the 80s, right, when they had their specific plan done and whatnot. Certainly, we have the Vest Parker project that's been, entitled forever there on the beach. That's going to be a smaller hotel than they had planned before. And you have these projects on the 710 State Street, which was the latest dust up. And but those are all zoned. Those were all bought many years ago and planned for. And yes, would housing be great? Yeah, but there's a balance. I think Ray Mahboob has announced that he may do where the Forever 21 building is on State Street, may do a hotel there.
No marijuana, no marijuana museum?
Well, it just depends on how many floors you want to go up, I think, Jerry, but it's what
See,
we
that's
just talked
not
about bad
ChatGPT.
jokes earlier, right?
But
Right there.
yeah, okay.
But whatever it is, I mean, 710 State Street, great example. So yeah, one time, there was proposed to do a housing project. I'm not really sure why that fell into the hotel realm instead from the developer. But I'm excited about having something on that corner. I'm excited about not having empty shops and vacancies. We need activity. We need more robust, a lot of people downtown where there's hotels are living. We're going to put probably 500 units or so in the Paseo Nuevo. I mean, there's a lot of stuff and like, once again, Josh, not sure what pipeline really means in this definition, but I know that in terms of what's planned out there, you got 600 units coming up in La Cumbre without even talking about what's going to go on the Sears property. So there's a bunch of stuff coming up, and I don't know why I would try to either ban or put some moratorium on a certain type of development. What we need is investment in this town right now.
Well,
Well, just to clarify, so Allison DeBusk, city planner, gave me those numbers, and she's talking about what's actually submitted to the city right now to come. Obviously, La Cumbre they're still in that pre-application phase. The Paseo Nuevo is a long way. Veracruz Park, is already done. So she's talking about like the new stuff, but of course, other stuff has been built and stuff will be built, but stuff that's actually application, that's what we're talking about. But, to Jerry's comment is that the developers say, hey, we'll build more housing downtown, but you won't let us go higher. We want more density. So I guess, what do you say about that? Should the city make it easier for developers to build housing by allowing 60 feet, 80 feet, whatever the number is, to allow more density?
Well, first of all, that's prescribed by the charter, the 60-foot limit. And that's a community priority, blah, 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 all those things. And that's fine. I always look to Santa Monica, about the same size agency we are, but they've got high rises, they've got rent control, they've got twice the average mean income that we do. And it's really expensive to live there. That hasn't really changed it. When could we possibly build to the level that will satisfy demand? I don't really know. There's always been demand here. Back in the 1930s is when they coined the phrase housing crisis in Santa Barbara. So I'm not really sure that when you build up and densification, from supply and demand, it makes sense. But you're also increasing the value of that piece of property when you increase the density allowed on it. So the market's going to determine what those prices are. We tried with AUD, and that's something we brought out, and we're all happy about it because it was going to be affordable by design. And we know how that worked out. It's not actually really true. So the only kind of real affordable housing, in terms of like, Class A affordable, is going to be subsidized. We have a very high level of subsidized housing in this town. Almost, 1/6 of it is subsidized or covenant restricted. So we got a big percentage for a small town like this, but it's a very desirable place to live. And, I think we have to keep trying to fill it in, but I'm not going to beat us up over something that, I think is being accomplished. It's being accomplished at a faster pace right now than it has been for decades.
yeah. And the other question I have is, just to take a step back, the atmospherics of above the political landscape. It just seems like with the push for housing, it's like all of a sudden, hotels and tourists have become, the latest bad guy. And don't kill the golden goose. How much of our city budget is still dependent on the hotel tax? And that's our number one industry, aside from city government, of course. It seems strange to me that this is somehow being made into an either or proposition.
Yeah, it's and I agree with that. I see the point, but we are a hospitality-based industry. Hospitality accounts for more than double the next category in terms of our sales tax revenue, and it is how we make our living. Look at Lahaina. That's how Maui makes its living, and people are going, "Oh, you can't bring all these tourists back while these people." Well, that revenue is really needed right now in a big way. And I see Stan Zankoff's, point about the hotels, because hospitality jobs aren't necessarily super well-paying jobs compared to other kinds of industries. But to the other point is what Ed said, it is how we roll. It's how we make a living. We don't have big manufacturing plants here. We don't have Union Carbide sitting down by the beach. I mean, we have this amazing place to come visit, and that's how we make our living. So, I can't chastise that industry or pick on that one particular industry. When I was in the restaurant business, one thing that we all complained about all the time was how many restaurants there were in this town. I mean, almost, one of the highest densities per population in this part of the country. And now we're like, oh my God, we got to get all these things permitted and all these things through to keep these guys going, which is great. I love the business friendly atmosphere, but the other side of the coin is, wow, what a switch that was. And so now all of a sudden the hotels are the bad guys, even though hotels will have restaurants and shops, other things in them as well.
Yeah, one more point on this before Josh is going to ask about the parklets, but where are we on the Airbnb police? Because that seems to be the other big argument that's being, there's tens of thousands of people illegally having an Airbnb. We can't have that.
We're talking about those stormtroopers we had jumping out of the airplane the other day.
Yeah.
No, we've begun our enforcement actions. We've sent out notifications. We've gone in. We have a couple of relatively egregious cases of sticking people in cubby holes and charging them by the night and whatnot. And so it's one of those things. If we're going to have a housing discussion and we're going to talk about available housing, it's really important that we make housing as what it was intended to be. So, for example, if you have a second, third, or fourth home or a bunch of rental properties in this town that you've converted to Airbnb, you're kind of making the problem worse. And we're not zoned for it. So it's not something we're making up. We're just enforcing what's on the books already.
Do you have a sense yet how many units we're talking about that people are using for Airbnb illegally?
I don't know. When I understand, and this is just anecdotally, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 across the city, but I don't know that. No, I mean, I'm just coming up with a number that I was told.
All right. And then of that number, just hypothetical, make it totally, if 1% of those people decide, oh, well, I guess I'll put this on the market for a regular rental, that'll add 150 units or something. That'll work.
I mean, it's not so much that we're solving the problem with this particular solution. We are enforcing the code because, frankly, as we allow these things to happen, particularly, as the city participated in TOT from an illegal unit, we're being a little bit hypocritical about what we're doing about housing. So it's just one little piece of the whole puzzle of what we're trying to do about housing.
All right. Josh, what do you got on parklets?
Well, I noticed on the Tuesday agenda, actually Jerry noticed it and pointed out to me, but on Tuesday agenda is the parklet discussion. And it looks like the city of Santa Barbara is going to be establishing a formal process for restaurants that want to have outdoor dining parklets. And this goes back to the big decision to charge not $5 a square foot, not $4, not $3, but $2 a square foot for this outdoor dining space. And so that'll be cemented, as well as where you can have your parklets. And then it's something like a $5,000 application fee. Anyway, I wanted to sort of ask you, Randy, where do you stand with the status of this outdoor dining? It feels like the efforts to open up part of the street to cars are gone. Maybe it's punted down the road, but this outdoor dining on State Street through this action looks like it's here to stay for a while. Can you explain what's going on and where your take is?
You sound confused, Josh, and join the team. No. So there's three parts to this. What we're doing on Tuesday is about right-of-way parklets. And those are the parklets. They're in the actual public right-of-way on the streets that may or may not take up parking, that are subject to certain protections because of automobile traffic and whatnot. And that is, of course, like any ordinance, it extends all over the city. And everybody always focuses on parklets in the downtown, and you forget about Milpas, you forget about Upper State, and you forget about Mesa and all these places that may have those things as well. Now, one proviso in what we're doing on Tuesday is staff recommends highly against having parklets on boulevards that have 4 lanes of traffic, which would preclude having them on Milpas or on Cabrillo, for example, or Upper State Street. But the thing we did last week was parklets on private property. And once again, everybody's thinking about the funk zone and what's going on down there with SB 2097 and the no longer having the need to provide parking for either customers or for residents. So those, that's fine. That's a state law, and they'll go through coastal permits down there and whatnot. I think about this. If you're in an area like the funk zone, and parking can be a challenge, and there are, when you don't have that kind of business or you don't cater to that kind of person, where do those cars go? Because you're busier, you have more seating, but that parking goes somewhere. Normally, the Coastal Commission doesn't want you to diminish parking in the coastal zone, but I believe SB 2097 will probably override that. So I'm not sure, but people didn't think about it, like Upper State Street. How about if Chick-fil-A, decides, okay, my driveway is going to be a patio now? I mean, will we do that? Well, I wouldn't think that would be logically we would. I'm not sure they would apply for it. But trying to wrestle this down and find out what we're trying to do has been really, really hard. I think there's a lot of inconsistencies. Personally, I don't like the idea of parklets in the right of way, only because we've had 2 of them completely wiped out by cars. Others have been dinged and hit. That's not a good thing. Secondly, if we're going to do them right, they're going to have enough of a barrier, like the size of a K-rail or whatever. It's going to take probably, a couple of feet off of the perimeter. Is there going to be enough to do that and provide the adequate passing for cars? And the third thing is, if you're in a block face and you put you're allowed to have your parklet, and you take up a couple of spaces, and or you block off an angle of vision for the next store, which might be a dress shop or a shoe store or whatever. Is that really fair? Is it fair that you do that, especially if that parklet's only open at nighttime and your business is open in the daytime, but you still don't have those parking spaces with the visibility? So those are all questions that make me think, what are we doing? Why would we go here? And is there really that big of a demand, or is it something we're trying to prove a point? We're trying to close streets, some ideology. And I'm literally confused about this. I don't have a focus on whatever the motivation is.
Are you saying that Milpas, since that is 4 lanes there, that there would be no parklets on Milpas anymore, or what is the?
If council goes with staff recommendation, that would be correct. But that's, once again, we don't know until we get up there on Tuesday how the big wheel is going to spin. But I've been on some parklets on Milpas, and it's, Milpas is a really busy street that barely fits 4 lanes. I mean, barely. That's when we closed after Sergio Romero was killed up on Upper Milpas. We closed 2 more blocks because we really didn't have room for 4 lanes. And he was killed because he was in a crosswalk and some guy went around the guy, stopped in the right lane. So, it's already problematic safety wise. I don't really understand what our motivation would be to try to put people in those positions any more than we are now.
It seems kind of weird too, like the El Bajío restaurant has that outdoor parklet on Milpas, and I can see somebody making a case for saying, wait a minute, you're not going to allow outdoor dining for restaurants on Milpas, but you're going to allow them on downtown State Street. What about those inequities? How come we need it there, but not in this part of the town? As we know, Milpas is just as important to our community at State Street. That's interesting to me.
Did you just quote me? I think you might have just quoted me there, Josh. I think that's precisely what I've said.
I summarized and made it more clear, which is
well, it's a blinding flash of the obvious. What is fair? What is equitable across the board? Why is one industry, and I'm getting a little heat from my former colleagues. I know how hard this business is, but compared to other kinds of businesses, and you may be on Coast Village Road is a great example. Now they're set off and separated from the traffic, so it really isn't that much of a safety concern. But is it, can they take up those parking spaces and be fair to the other merchants? I wouldn't think so if I were a merchant there, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, listening to you kind of break down the complexity of all this, I'm sort of struck. I mean, it seems like every time Well, and you or Eric Friedman come in would say, why don't we try opening up a couple blocks to traffic? Or, why don't we try actually charging a fair square footage? There's other members, who are there and go, oh, we can't do that. We have to wait for the master plan. We have to wait for the State Street master plan. But then when the deal goes down, it's all this little point-to-point navigation, making it up as we go along on Tuesdays. And it's very tactical. I don't see the strategy here.
Well, not to beat a horse that I already shot to death, but the whole thing about the charging per square foot was brought forward by our own subcommittee and brought forward to us, and it was voted on and passed by the finance committee and by council, and then it was brought back off of consent and basically erased and brought down to this it almost went to for free, and it ended $2 a foot. But my little stump speech goes a little bit like this: there's nothing magical about an automobile, nothing magical about it at all. However, what it will provide on State Street is, number one, access for elderly and disabled. And we're proving that because we opened the Granada block, the 1200 block, for that. It's also it's what the bikes need to be contained. We can put up signs all day long, but did we have that problem when we had traffic on the streets? We did not. So that would help that situation, because we need to have bike lanes on State Street. That's part of the bike master plan. Third thing is trolley. The trolley doesn't really exist without cars. And they're talking about, well, we'll put golf carts in and whatever. I'm going, why are we're turning ourselves into tiger butter just to try to do this? And the solution is right there. We don't even have the money to change out the planters in terms of the kind of plants we put down, because the other ones are looking ratty. And they go, well, we'll vote for it. Well, and then we find out, let's just focus on the cleaning part. And it's still, and the cleaning part is a matter of debate, how people are happy or unhappy with that right now. So the car itself doesn't provide much, but it does also put retail businesses in their comfort zone. They want to be on a street that has traffic, and you can ask them about it. That's what I'm just telling you what they tell me is they need that visibility. They don't need to be hidden off in some nine block dead zone somewhere. So I don't get it. Now we're going to open up the Granada Street, right, to 1200 block. The question is, now, does Arigato, for example, it has a parklet on that street, do they have to then comply with the right-of-way safety standards, because there will be linear traffic on that street? That's not been answered so far. We carved out the west Victoria Street, and those buddies of mine have restaurants there, but why are we doing that? And why are we not doing Sola or Ortega or Cannon Perdido? These things are mysterious to me, and they really are. And I can't, I'm having trouble with this. I don't know how to explain it to the general populace.
And there we have chapter 36 of Rebecca Bjork's new book, Why I Decided to Leave Early. Okay.
Hey, Jerry, can I ask Randy
go
a
for it.
question here? Okay. So, Randy, this is a look into the future question, but it's the kind of question journalists might have privately, but I'll just ask it here. You obviously have made a certain amount of, I don't want to say enemy, but a certain amount of opposition among the restaurant industry.
Mhm.
Obviously, you're in your first term as mayor. You're probably going to run again. I don't know anyone who runs one term and decides they want to stop. And then
I wish Joe Biden would.
And then we have sort of this other faction. We have Kristen Sneddon, who, journalists will say, oh, she's gearing up to run for a mayor, and she's kind of positioning herself well for that by kind of being opposite of you and Eric to some degree. So the question is, do you think politically, while you're doing all this, while you're still talking about State Street and focus on restaurants, and why don't we just open it to cars, and why are we trying to do all this stuff that's super complicated when the answer is simple? And Sneddon is over here saying, let's let the master plan play out. Let's figure out a way to do this. This is about change. And she's positioning herself opposite of you. Do you think, am I going to be a Kathy Murillo here, where it was easy to get elected, but then something shifts in those 4 years? Do you think about her strategy and what's going on here?
Well, first of all, whatever we do in the interim does not preclude the master plan going forward. And any of you guys have been around for a while, and I know you guys have, know that whenever we figure out what the consultant brings us, it's still going to take some time to boil down to a consensus. And then we have to go through and find financing, which is so far a big mystery to everyone. Okay. But from a broader sense, politically or politics, I always use the word politics in the pejorative sense, to be honest with you, because I just go, what I do is I'm trying to do community service. Politics is what you do to please people instead of doing your job. Politics is what you do when you're counting votes instead of looking at results. So when I look at the political thing or whatever, I can't think that way. And it's not, and I really get a lot of flack from people who support me and advise me and whatnot. Oh my God, you can't do that. It's political suicide. I go, I can't think that way. I can't think because right now I've got a street right out my window right here that is probably as dead as it's ever been. And we're losing more tenants. We've lost 6 or 7 restaurants. So it hasn't been a panacea for even restaurants. And I don't know why. And I don't know that opening the street up would actually fix that. But what I do know is what we've got is not working. And it's going south very quickly. It's not good for public safety. The other night, our cops would love to be able to cruise a black and white up and down the street once in a while. That'd be a nice visual thing. They're riding their bikes. They're there. It's just harder to see them. Okay. I would love to be able to clean more robustly, but it's hard because you got to work around all these little structures and whatnot. And I would love to have every retailer or every business person who wants to be in business in Santa Barbara go, State Street's the place to be. And right now they're not saying that. And part of it is the certainty. What are we going to be when we grow up? We don't know. So every other promenade that's worked out in the country has done it as a plan first, financed, grant funded, or whatever it was, and then built. We're trying to reverse engineer the whole thing. We've got this thing. We're trying to justify it, and that's where we fall apart.
Yeah. Well, we did have that rare glimmer of good news with the word about the Paseo, the possible construction of lots of housing at Paseo Nuevo. And Rebecca and Sarah were kind enough to sit down with Josh and Nick and I and kind of walk us through. Is there anything new on that? I mean, there's many a step between the cup and the lip, many a slip between the cup and the lip between that one. Anything, have we advanced at all? Is there any negotiation? Is there anything new?
The negotiation is ongoing. The news part, the news piece of it is all 7 of us are completely jacked up about it because it really is a generational and transformational part of the downtown. The Paseo itself is going to solve a lot of State Street problems, but it's probably going to take, if everything goes apace, it's going to be probably 2028 before there is actually occupancy over there, right? So, but what we could have there is, number one, 500 units of some level of housing. We can have a smaller retail profile, smaller shops is what we need. We need to kind of go back to where we were before the RDA, where we had small local shops that were doing things, not to preclude national tenants, but the retail thing is the footprints have shrunk quite a bit. Car dealerships, everything has shrunk down. So I think it's going to be fabulous. I mean, we're really excited about this.
And Rebecca said she wanted to have the deal in place by the time she leaves at the end of the year. Is that realistic?
The one person I probably wouldn't doubt is Rebecca, because when she's got the bone in her teeth and she's going with it. I mean, she's trying to get this done to the extent that the city can do it. We still have to do, all the CEQA and all the other things that go on. But as far as making the deal between ourselves and the developers, and we've got these really bright consultants working with us on this deal right now, people that do this kind of thing, not just the consultant, but actually people that do this for a living, because it's pretty arcane. It's kind of complex. But if we can get this done and we can get our wish list accomplished and they can get their pro formas filled in, we could have something done before the end of the year in terms of some commitments anyway. I mean, nothing's going to be signed, sealed, and delivered. That's too short of a window, but it's still, boy, it's really an exciting time for the downtown area.
All right. Josh, talk about this Metrolink thing, this story you had, that seems like kind of a big deal too.
Yeah, so Metrolink is in talks with a whole bunch of agencies, SBCAG.
What's Metrolink?
So Metrolink is a commuter rail service based in LA, but has rides all the way from San Diego and San Bernardino County to Ventura County. And so it's a transportation system that works, that's proven, and people ride it. And Santa Barbara has had this huge issue for years of how do we bring people from Ventura and Oxnard into Santa Barbara, because we have jobs here, but as we always talk about, the housing is out of reach. So people commute, it clogs up Highway 101. We're adding, we're making changes, the third lane, but it's a huge transportation congestion, quality of life issue. So the idea that these local agencies are working with Metrolink to somehow figure out a way to provide a proven, reliable link on the Union Pacific tracks through Santa Barbara into Goleta is a significant deal. For years, they tried to figure this out, and they finally reached a deal with the Pacific Surfliner, and then that got derailed during the pandemic, and then the funding was cut, and there wasn't a whole lot of ridership anyway. It's really hard to sync transportation drop-off times with people's work schedules, and so the ridership was not as high. So one of the things that's annoying is the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments holds monthly meetings, and it's made up of a representative from each city and the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. But prior to those meetings, there are these North County and South County sub-regional meetings. And if we go back to La Cumbre Plaza, the reason Randy got derailed at that meeting was because, they had hatched this stuff out at the South Coast sub-regional meeting prior, and with meetings behind the scenes leading up to that. So by the time it came to SBCAG, it was a done deal. It's not
Hey, you sure you don't want to endorse Roy Lee today?
It's not transparent, and I think that there should be more transparency from, journalists need to read those agendas because they are public, they are out there, but the meetings aren't recorded, so you got to go to them. Old school, right? Like, remember when journalists actually went to meetings and didn't rely to watch them on YouTube? You have to go to them. So at this meeting was when they talked about Metrolink for the first time. And Randy, what is your take? You think Metrolink is this going to work?
Well, I'd like to think it's going to work. And also there are, any kind of public transit is heavily subsidized, as we know. So it takes a lot of money, and there's also scheduling with Union Pacific, who still owns the rails. And you got, so Union Pacific, Amtrak, and all these things with Metrolink. But we think by, I think it was maybe April, that there'd be some service that would be twice a day, coming up and leaving the area. Now, the question is, do we live on those specific times and schedules? And we, and there's the chicken and egg thing. If we build it, will they come? And how much can we do? I think there's like almost a 500 person capacity, but we only had like 100 regular riders last time. So I don't really know what's going to happen. It always frustrates me because I've always thought about Southern California rail services. We have the medians in all of our, we already have the easements in the middle of the freeway. We could be doing an elevated rail or an elevated, like the monorail Disneyland thing or whatever, which would be really cool. Could be electromagnetic and all that. We never seem to look at that. And then we have to deal with the easements and the land transit, and it's just so problematic. But that's my Jetsons take on life. But but this thing is a step in the right direction for sure, because the whole idea was a lane and a train. That was the whole mantra, doing the HOV lane and getting that set up. But rather than stick on the bus, where you still might be susceptible to traffic delays, you'd have the train, which is, that technically more reliable, at least in theory.
What's the time window about this that we're talking about? Is this before or after the State Street Master Plan is completed in 2075?
Yeah, I was going to say, one would hope it's before. I don't even know if we'll be using trains by then, Jerry, but it's, no. I don't know. They're talking about trying to roll something out in the spring, I think. So Margie Kern, our executive director, is really well versed in all this. So I said that finally you talked to her, I think, finally, Josh, right? To get the
Yeah, I mean, the story kind of pushes everybody to start talking about it in public now, and Metrolink and SBCAG and all of these agencies are going to start coming together and negotiating, but their goal is April to
Yeah.
have some kind of service. Now, there was a recalculation of population for the census. So now
Yeah.
Santa Barbara is, I guess, lumped in with sort of Ventura, LA, Southern California. So there's access to more dollars for this. So this is public transportation. It's very complicated. So that is their goal, to get that service out here. Will people ride it? You know, who knows? But
Well, yeah. I mean, the wild card there is of course, working remotely. And obviously everybody did that during the pandemic, and now not a lot of people came back, or maybe a lot of people did come back, or more people. I mean, I don't think we know
more
the
and more
answer.
employers are starting to demand presence, but as you mentioned earlier, the housing costs are still one of the big factors why people live in Ventura and Seamead and come up here and have to either commute or work remotely. I mean, I'm hoping that the commuter thing really takes hold. I mean, as gas prices start tickling $7 a gallon, I mean, that's how our regional buses have done better in those times as a rule. But congregate travel also took a big dive during COVID because people didn't want to be in proximity of each other.
Right.
So I think we're kind of beyond that now. We can get back into being all cozy and nice and traveling on trains and buses together again. But it's also the employers are going to have some kind of a tolerance for, because you got to get to the train and there's got to be a multimodal, how you're going to get to a transit center and then to work from there. And there's a lot of things we're not used to on the West Coast that you're going to have to get used to in order to get to work on time, or have, van pooling locally as a multimodal thing. All those things. I've been talking to the school district about this because obviously they're having problems getting their teachers here because of the cost of living. So what are their transit options going to be? And will the school district or employers subsidize maybe a rail pass to incentivize that? There's a lot of things in the works that could prove pretty fruitful. I think it really depends on how we view this.
Hey, we're running out of time, but I got to ask you this. So I think the good news, bad news story of the recent weeks for me was Representative Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco announced she's going to run for another term. I guess that's good news. The bad news is that means the state senator Scott Wiener, biggest twit in the state capitol, will not be running for that seat. So he's going to be around being annoying for another 4 years. Is there like a full-time person in city government who does nothing but keep track of all of these housing things that come down from Sacramento, A, and then B, what do you think of this initiative, One Neighborhood, or Our Neighborhood Voices, that's being driven by local governments or local officials in Northern California, but would reinstate a lot of local control over these kind of planning decisions that Wiener has just swept aside?
Second question first. I absolutely get the whole thing about trying to retain or regain some local control. I was just in Sacramento for a League of Cities conference, and everyone I talked to up there and everyone who spoke publicly was on the same page. We've got to quit getting these mandates, unfunded mandates, out of Sacramento to do things, and when things don't perform to Mr. Wiener's expectations, all of a sudden he tries to crush us down with mandates and buy right things and whatnot that are to fulfill his vision. When you fly between here in Sacramento, Jerry and Josh, and you look down, even starting in Goleta, you're going, there's a construction project happening on every open space there is. It's a construction boom. The question is, and that group asks us, are developers, kind of lining the pockets of some of these political forces going forward? It sure looks like it. I mean, wow.
Yeah, Wiener is the number one guy from development interest for taking.
Well, and you can't get bid. We're in a bad bidding situation where we build contract and we have one responder, and you're stuck with. Goleta went through that with their striping project on Hollister, where it went 4 or 5 times the original bid because they can.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's always a cyclical thing. We go
So
back.
is that something you're going to support? You think that initiative? If
Yeah,
if you
I
think it
haven't really,
qualifies?
I haven't really sat down with a fine tooth comb and look, I hate to jump on other people's initiatives, but, and matter of fact, I'm not a big fan of initiative law to begin with. However, in this case, this is basically a grassroots uprising against this usurpation. Going back to your point earlier, I think it was you, Josh, that mentioned about going up for housing density and whatnot. At what point do we create so much of that we start diminishing the quality of life? I mean, infrastructure rise, that'll be a challenge if we increase the population that much.
And resources.
And then what is the final market for small rental units? I mean, it's great for the 20 somethings. Is that sustainable in the long run? Are we going to go back to the era of condo conversions like we were 25, 30 years ago? You remember we had Measure E because too much commercial was being built. Well, we've never come anywhere close to that threshold because that was a trend that just kind of went away. So housing is important. I get it. The housing is necessary and it's expensive here. And I'm afraid without extra subsidies, it's always going to be pretty expensive here.
And what about, how do we keep track of all this crap? Because literally, I mean, there were like 10, 12 bills that Gavin signed.
So one thing we've done recently, I was just up visiting these folks, is we have engaged a relatively inexpensive lobbying firm, however, to kind of, get
The
us.
league or Santa Barbara?
No, Santa Barbara City, we actually have our own, and most cities have done that. We've just been kind of late to the game. But to keep us apprised of all these bills, I had dinner with these people, and they are versed in all this stuff because that's what they do. And plus, trying to seek out grant funding and things for various projects like Planning State Street, things like that. But you're right, Jerry. It's our legal department doesn't have the bandwidth to keep up with
That's the idea. They just shove this stuff out and shove it down your throat. It's just,
if you look at the bills on the governor's desk, you see how many of them are sponsored by Scott Wiener going down the thing. And the guy's very powerful and very smart. But I mean, everything from legalizing psilocybin to building houses on top of your garage.
Well, that one, why the hell did he veto that one of all? I mean, there was a lot of stuff he could have.
Oh, somebody might be running for president, don't you think? Maybe.
And I worry, frankly, and I'll get in trouble for this, but I worry that our state senator Monique Limon is just a little bit too close to Scott Wiener.
Oh, they're personal friends, actually.
Yeah.
But I talk to her about it from time to time, and she knows where I am on all this stuff. And she goes, yeah, I mean, she doesn't support everything he does, but in the political party sense, and I won't speak for Monique, but just in general, and this is what the politics part drives me nuts. There's politics and there's service. And I realize you can't serve if you can't get elected. But, I just have a very, pothole kind of mentality about all this stuff. Just, get the potholes done.
Well, and he had that one to build more in the coastal zone, which passed and was, and I asked Monique about that. And I said, well, how'd you vote? Well, I didn't vote. I took a walk. Why? Well, leadership wanted it. Well, leadership, who the hell are you representing up there?
It's hard. And when I talk to and Saludo, and I think Saludo's a very good public servant, by the way, but it's hard because they just get this, this hammer down all the time. So it makes me actually grateful for the Brown Act on our level because we can't supposedly talk to each other before we go in to vote, which,
Well, that's clear.
Yeah. It's very clear.
That becomes clearer and clearer every Tuesday. Josh, you got one more thing? We got to go.
I think we covered it all, Jerry. So
okay. All right. Well, Mayor Andy Rowse, thank you as always for being so generous with your time with us and giving us a little more substance and detail on a lot of these issues that we don't get to talk about at length otherwise. And Josh Molina, as always, thank you for your participation. And you know what? Zoom has changed all my buttons here. Oh, here it is.